Once the system is established, it's a fabulous producer of income. Stick around, we're going to tell you how.
Enjoy the episode.
If you're an investor or want to be an investor and you're looking to create passive income that exceeds your monthly expenses, then this is the podcast for you. Here on the Infinite Wealth Podcast, we combine the philosophies of Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad, along with Nelson Nash's Infinite Banking Concept. Welcome to the Infinite Wealth Podcast. I'm Cameron Christensen, along with our co-host Anthony Faso, and we're continuing our journey through Nelson Nash's book. And today what we're going to be talking about is page 71, an even distribution of age classes. That does not sound interesting.
No.
But today, stick around. I know we're going to be talking about how to build a system. And once you have that system produced, it's a fabulous generator of income. Right, Anthony?
Yes.
Awesome. All right, Faso, let's go. As you kind of read through this section, what jumped out at you?
Well, I would say for one, what Nelson starts with the story, and what he talks about is what if you had 40,000 acres of land that you wanted to plant trees on over a 40-year period. And in essence, what you do is you divide them up into 40 parcels, and then each year you plant a parcel. So year one, parcel one, year two, parcel two, and so forth, till eventually you're able to plant trees on all 40. And then we can go back to the first parcel and harvest that and produce some cash flow from there. This is a great income strategy. The downside, Cameron, is this takes 40 years.
Yeah.
Right. And, but what Nelson's saying is that there is an alternative where you can do something similar, particularly if you're not a forester or you don't have 40,000 acres, but you can do something similar by establishing a family banking system.
Yeah.
So that's really what the encompassing of this chapter is. The ones before we're just talking about why infinite banking, why use life insurance, some examples to use it. And now we need to start thinking long-term of expanding the banking system, not just for us, but for the generations to come.
Well said. Well said. Right. As I'm reading this section, I feel like Nelson's casting the vision, right? So he is painting a picture for us to kind of grab onto. So I actually enjoyed this section very much. And again, man, this section's like 2 pages, right? So even you can read it in like an hour and a half. As you get through it, again, there's some really good pieces in here that we're going to highlight. What I did, Anthony, is I went through and I kind of read it the first time, and then I started to kind of characterize a couple items. And so I have 3 big takeaways from kind of this section. Do you want to go first?
Well, I will say,
what do you think?
I read it twice, and then I ended up having like 4 or 5 takeaways. But
you told me your takeaways, yeah.
No. Go for it.
Awesome. All right. So, guys, the first 3 takeaways, I won't touch on them all, Anthony. I'm going to start with the first one, and I'll share. Feel free to jump in. But the 3 takeaways that I had, number 1 was play the game, right? Nelson's trying to tell us the game, making sure that we play it. I'm going to come back to that and dive in a second. But the other piece that I had was pass the message. And the third piece that I had was promote stewardship. So those are the 3 takeaways that I had for this section. I'm going to start with play the game. And on page 72, what Nelson's talking about is he introduces us to kind of building, or this family that had built policies for their kids over the years. And at the very end of that example, he gives us an example of, oh, by the way, what I'm showing you guys in this illustration is not even banking. It's really just putting money into a policy. And he says, don't forget to be an honest banker and to play the game. And what he's talking about being an honest banker is you got to account for the money, for the cost of money. And then also you got to account for all the little things that banks and financial institutions nickel and dime us for. And so he's shown us how to be a good steward of our funds along the way. Anthony, I got a question for you here. As I was thinking about this idea of playing the game and him highlighting the fact that this is an example of someone just putting money in their policy, is looking over your clients. I know the answer. Have you ever had any clients that have not played the game, where they've just put money into a policy, they've never taken any loans, and they've just left that cash value there? And if you have, why are they not playing the game?
I tell you, I particularly, I do have a few, and I would say the, the ones this is more apt to more of my longtime clients.
Mm.
And I think in part, we were teaching them how to use a policy to finance liabilities. And the problem with some of these people I'm discussing about really didn't have liabilities. They were high income earners and were people that wanted to pay in cash. Uh, Now that we've transitioned more of leveraging the policy to finance assets, I think I'm having less and less people being scared, and that's, I think, is the appropriate word, because that's why people don't use the policy. And I think it'd be a combination of fear and lack of education,
Mm.
and in part because I got one client that in mind who is always hesitant to use a policy because doesn't like the word loan. And
Mm.
if I take that money to buy something, I'm going to have a loan. I'm going to have to pay interest. And the problem is their learning stops right there. They're not looking at the whole picture. They're not looking at the growth of the policy. And if they're buying an asset, the growth of the asset. They're really just focused on that interest. And this is where I think it's important that you're working with an infinite banking coach who really understands infinite banking. Because oftentimes, and I'm sure you've had some clients say, "Well, I'm going to use my Uncle Bobby or a family member or my financial planner," right? Is the policy, your success in infinite banking, the policy is only a piece of it. The real biggest results are going to be how you use it. And you need a coach in there who's going to push you when those times when you are making some fearful or decisions out of fear. So not only is it important to have a good infinite banking coach, it's good to be in a community with other like-minded individuals, which is one of the many reasons why we created a private Facebook group. And this group is really half about ways to make passive income, and the other is infinite banking questions. So we will put that link in the show notes. You do not need to be a client to uh, to be approved in the group, or do you need to have a policy? This is really more, and kind of what our tone is education based. We want to be able to. Cameron, I know I went off on a slight tangent, but did I answer your question?
Huh? What? I zoned out when you started talking. I think you did. But I'm going to answer it as well. So thank
Yeah.
you for throwing it back to
Do
me.
you have any clients? I just seem like
thank
you're
you.
so great
Thank
that
you.
you just all your clients are max using your policy.
Well, actually, what I wrote down there, the note that I did take when you started talking was that you said that if you have this issue, they're longtime clients. So my takeaway was that you probably weren't a very good advisor early on, but you've gotten better since we partnered up. So good job. You're welcome.
I'm really the one who gives that backhanded compliments, but touche.
Yeah. No, I was messing around there, but absolutely. I think we've all got clients as you do kind of an annual review. You're meeting with somebody, you look in there, and they're not quite using the policies. And I agree 100% with what you said. It all comes down to fear, right? For whatever reason, they're afraid to kind of take that first step and take a loan. And oftentimes, we'll talk about leveraging cash value for investments, real estate, business. But man, if you're out there and you're one of those people that hasn't quite taken that first step yet, a great way to practice or great first step is to finance like a car, right? Maybe it's your kid's car, or maybe it's a credit card that you haven't quite paid off yet. And so that's a great first step to kind of just get practice of taking a policy loan, setting up a loan repayment, creating some accountability. And so that usually kind of gets people moving and out of that kind of little lull there. So great point. The other thing that I would say kind of under this, this point is when we're playing the game, again, he's talking about just putting money in the policy and not using it. I think this is really goes back to the essence of what Nelson's trying to show us in this book is that a lot of the illustrations and comparisons that people make to whole life, it's always the bare minimum. Right. And so I think the funding of this policy, again, is an example of the bare minimum. If you guys want to see what an average or maybe an above average usage of a policy is, you're not going to find it kind of in these books, right? Is you're going to have to call us, get on a discovery call with us, and ask for kind of an example of the borrowing strategy. We can build a policy to your situation, and then we can give you some examples of what it looks like if you start to use it. And that's probably the best and most current way to illustrate an example of somebody kind of maximizing the cash values in a policy. So I want to make that point before we move on.
Well done, Cameron.
Great, man. What else, Anthony? You got a point you want to make, or?
I got plenty, my friend. And some of our points do overlap, so I'll let you say yours, and then our kind of enlighten people and kind of take it to a higher level. But another thing that shot out for me about this chapter is Nelson had talked about money will not buy happiness, but poor stewardship of money will steal happiness.
Well said.
Thank you. Thank you, Nelson.
Yeah,
but
you didn't say
I've seen many of clients who have a lot of money and a lot of wealth, but it's never enough, right? And it's not filling their cup, and it's not making them happy. And I've also seen clients where they make a lot of money, but they're continuing to spend it. Feels good during the moment, but then as they get older, when they hit 50, 60 years old, they're like, oh man, I don't have much saved for retirement. And that's why we're seeing a lot of these senior citizens having to go back to work because they didn't properly plan. And what Nelson's trying to prove in here is that we need to not just focus on the money, but using that money to do good things. And part of it is building wealth for us, but also teaching the next generation as well.
Well said. I too have that as my third point, and a couple of the items that I wrote down there. One is that if you look at this section, short section, Nelson actually opens and ends with a couple Bible references. He's got Proverbs kind of in there at the forefront, and then also right at the end. If you guys haven't read that, go back. Proverbs 13:22 is the one that he opens up with, and he says, "A wise man leaves an inheritance for his children's children." And then the last reference that he has is Proverbs 27:24, and he says, "A crown is not secure for all generations." So I sat there, I started thinking about that, and there's two things that kind of come to my mind. One is, in order for somebody to leave an inheritance, is you've got to develop the skill set, and you've got to accumulate the wealth in the first place to be able to pass that down. The second thing is that crown or wealth is not secure for all generations. Is my takeaway from that is you have to develop a framework or a system of passing the knowledge down from one generation to the next. And I think that's what he's providing here with Infinite Banking, is he's actually providing both pieces for us. So as I look in that section, that was two big takeaways. In regards to stewardship, what I wrote down is we're given an opportunity to provide a wealthy mentality to succeeding generations over a long period of time. But it's our option, it's our choice in whether or not we actually do that. And the thought that I had there was actually, I saw an interview. They're interviewing a parent. This is a couple years ago. And the reporter had asked this dad, they were talking to this dad because he had two sons in the NFL. And the reporter was like, "Well, what's the secret sauce? Like, what did you do? How did you do this?" And he said, "There is no secret." And he said that there's no lazy kids. There's just lazy parents. And he said, so every day I was up getting these kids out to work, right? Making sure they put in the time and the effort to make sure that they were physically fit and they were mentally aware of this game and all that stuff. And so it was a great testament to us, right? As parents, as we have an obligation. It's up to you whether you choose to follow through with that or not.
That was good, Cam.
Yeah, thanks. I'm wrapped up. That's everything I had for stewardship.
When you had mentioned a crown is not secure for all generations, you know what popped in my head? Well, I don't think you watch it, Game of Thrones. Okay, especially watching House of Dragons. I mean, it's kind of, it is definitely not secure of that crown is going to pass down. Great points, Cameron. And because one thing he had talked about is, a good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. And one plan or one option that Nelson had laid out is having the grandparents get a policy on the grandkids. And in part, you have the generation typically with the most disposable income securing the death benefit and these policies on the youngest generation. And what I think happens with a lot of our listeners, what I notice, most of our clients aren't coming for money. Most of them are the ones that are trying to build and figure this out themselves. And most of them, and me included, really didn't get fed into or taught about finances.
Till you met me. Then I touch everything you know.
Kind of, sort of. Yeah. But since nobody taught me, and probably a lot of people, if you're there, nobody taught you, it is what it is. But at least for me, I want to make sure that my kids and my grandkids cannot say the same. So we're big proponents of getting policies on that next generation. And what's typically happened, kind of where I feel my obligation is, I'm getting policies on my grandkids. I also got policies on my kids as well. But part of what we're instituting with my kids and grandkids is that this is what I'm doing for you as my grandson, and you need to do that for your grandson. And we need to start planting those seeds early. And because not only is it of securing their death benefit and having a pile of money, the important thing is teaching these kids how to use money and how money works. And the best way to do it is for them to do it with their own dollars. And they can do this with a policy, maybe even taking a loan to start some little side business, or if they wanted to do something on YouTube or whatever it is, it's going to take some capital. Well, let's teach them to use that policy to finance some of their assets, so they can learn when they have a small amount of money. So when they have larger amounts of money, they're going to be more confident on how to properly use that.
Well said.
Was that all your takeaways?
No. What was your on stewardship?
You got a takeaway from my takeaway?
I did. Yeah. So
that means I had a good takeaway.
It was. What got me thinking is that just a brief story is I've shared this with you guys before. My kids are 14, 12, and 10. My girls, I've had conversations about money, but I wouldn't say it's anything that's real tangible at this point. But my son, we've had some really good conversations over the years about money and about kind of the way that this looks moving forward. Anyways, long story short is that we're around dinner with a couple of friends, and somebody asked him and said, "Hey, what are you thinking about? What do you want to do after you graduate high school?" And he started talking about building a business. And I love that idea for two reasons. One is his default is no longer college. His default is building a business. The second one, the reason he started continuing to talk about it, and the reason I even love this idea or this conversation more, was he started talking about building that business next summer. So he just started school. He's a freshman now, but he's not thinking about waiting till he's 20 or 30 years old or 40 years old to start a business. He's talking about starting this thing and taking action now today. And so there's kind of two takeaways that I had from listening to him. One is I felt like, man, I'm getting through to this kid, right? Like he's listening, right? We got to take some action, right? College should not be the default for everybody. And so I love that. Thought I'd share it with you guys just about the idea of planting seeds. It doesn't happen overnight, right? But it's just a constant conversation that you continue to have with your kids.
Well, I tell you, there's more and more kids are choosing not to go to college. And I spoke to one of those kids, a young adult, and he called himself a college opt-out, not a college dropout. Like he's opting out of going to college, and he's creating his own business, and which college is for some people, but it's not for everybody. I think there's too much pressure to put people through college, but there's a lot of ways to create wealth and to be able to create income to support your family. College is not necessarily the only answer, which I think in the next chapter, Nelson goes further into that.
Yeah, well said.
But it's always cool when you hear these young kids like getting it and wanting to do something different. Cameron, like imagine if you had learned some of these principles when you were 18.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't find me until you were in. Dude, were you in your 20s? You were.
I was 27. 27.
That was a long time ago.
You were 47 when you came across Infinite Banking. Look at you now. It's 67.
Could haven't aged a bit.
All grown up. You look great. Go ahead.
Well, another thing that I thought that I got from this book was the advantage of instilling infinite banking in your family. And to me, one of the best reasons is the best inheritance isn't dollars. It's the ability to make dollars. And to me, that's what is the most important piece of infinite banking, is being able to teach that next generation really how money works. And one thing that I'm doing, and I had shared on a podcast and a detailed YouTube showing the numbers, is what we're doing for my grandchildren, where we're funding a policy for them. Then we will, in fact, we're in the process of getting a rental property for my oldest grandson. So before he turns 4, he will have gotten his first property.
Nice.
We will put the link to that video in the show notes. But some of the advantage of this is we are teaching him about how money works. And again, it's not grandpa's money. It's not dad's money. It is his money. Also, once we start doing this infinite banking, those dollars are protected from taxes. And I know a common question we have when we're talking with somebody on a discovery call or going through the education phase is one of their main concerns: I want to lower taxes. The problem is most people want to lower them today. We need to lower them, period, not just for today. Because when you get that chasing that tax deduction today, say maybe a 401k, well, then you're just kicking that tax can down the road. And I don't know anybody in their right mind that thinks taxes are going to go down. Okay. Also, an advantage of doing infinite banking is we don't need to rely on these government created plans. We don't have to rely on Social Security. We don't have to rely on a 401k. Also, we don't need to rely on a 529 plan. Like what I'm doing for my grandson, he doesn't need a 529 plan because we have these policies. And some of the advantages of infinite banking over a 529 plan is we don't have government restrictions on how we can use that money. If Vance wants to go to college, there's a pile of money for him to do so. But if you want to start a business, he can't use his 529 plan, but he could use his policy. But also the point is, I'm interested, and my goal is to be updated compared to the original plan I did for Vance to kind of where we actually are. I think we projected to buy that first property when he was 6, but we're able to buy it for 4. But maybe I'll make some content on how we were able to expedite that. But again, imagine if you have your kids, your grandkids that don't have to rely on these government sponsored plans. And another advantage of incorporating infinite banking with the family that even us don't really talk about is having that death benefit. Oftentimes we think about that death benefit to replace our income, so our kids or our spouse can pay the bills. But we're just making that assumption that we're going to get approved. I've shared on this podcast many times that my daughter is uninsurable. We recently tried about a year ago or this year to get a policy on her, and she got denied. Fortunately, we had gotten policies on her when her were young, so we had secured some of that death benefit. But fortunately, my daughter does listen to this podcast, So her reaction when I told her we couldn't get a policy on her, she's like, well, can I get a policy on you or mom? Right?
Smart.
Yeah. She is smart. Right. But a lot of times when particularly in our podcast, we're talking about passive income more than your monthly expenses. And that's really what we focus on, because that's more of an immediate need. But sometimes we do need to step back and really have a long-term view. And there's a lot more attributes that infinite banking has. So I would encourage anybody who's on the fence and wanted to learn more, hop into our community. And more importantly, why don't you hop on a discovery call with us and kind of see if this is a good fit?
Well said. You worded it differently, and I'm going to just clean that up a little bit. I'm going to say a little bit better.
Do.
Yeah, exactly.
You know how I am with the wordsmith.
Yeah,
I'm not that good with words.
The third item that I highlighted was similar but better than yours. It was called Pass the Message. And so what Nelson talks about at the bottom of page 72 on the left is he said, if the message is passed onto each childbearing generation, you can create a system that is far more profitable and certain as to the results. Again, the highlight that I wanted to, the point I wanted to highlight here was that he says the message is passed. He didn't say the policy is passed. Right? So he's talking about the education and the knowledge that we as parents have got to pass on to them. I won't belabor that point. I think you guys get it at this point. But what I would say is that don't feel like there's a big burden there, right? It's a consistent message that you got to deliver to the kids. And man, it doesn't have to be a big vacation somewhere where your guys are pulling everybody together and it's all about infinite banking, right? Man, it could just be a family meeting even once a year where you just bring this idea up and talk about it. You could do something as simple as that. And I promise you that that'll make a mark on your kids and have them remember some of these principles you're trying to teach them. So the sooner you start that, the better you're going to be.
Well said, Cameron. Thanks. I like how you clean that up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Appreciate it.
All right, guys. 3 takeaways again. They just happen to be mine. Number 1 is play the game. 2 is pass the message. And then 3 is promote stewardship. We hope you guys enjoyed this section in Nelson's book.
Go make it a fantastic day.
Take care.
If you like this video, I know you're like this one. And if you want to learn how investors use infinite banking to increase their returns and lower their taxes, check this out. And if you have some questions and want to see if infinite banking is for you, hop on a discovery call with us. Link for that will be in the description.